There are many who assert that ethics and religions are complementary and that there cannot be ethics and morals without religion. What is more, they also assert that without religions, man will be worse off than animals. Religions in its many forms have been around for around 50,000 years and more. Ever since human sacrifice, especially infant sacrifices, were part and parcel of religion. Even to this day, there are instances, though rare, of human sacrifices in the name of gods and religions. Long ago, Hinduism prescribed Sati, the practice of burning widows along with their husbands. When the husband died, they used to burn him, and on that pyre, the widow was also expected to burn herself. This is called Sati. In like manner, there are religious practices like circumcision, which have no ethical dimensions of any kind. This would not have been so if religions promote ethics and morals. Unless human sacrifices, sati, and circumcision can be construed as ethical. We also see in the myths and scriptures many instances of gods and divine characters engaging in unethical practices. Thus, in the Bible, God promotes the genocide of the Midianites in the book of Numbers, chapter 31. Further on in the book of Joshua, we see the Israelites committing genocide on the Canaanites of Jericho and killing their men, women, children, as well as their domestic animals. This was done on the orders of the biblical God who helped the Israeli marauders by preventing the sun from setting so that the Israelites could carry out the genocide. Then again in book of Numbers, chapter 15, 32 to 36, we see a poor man stoned to death on God's orders because he picked up some fire stick on a Sabbath day. On the other hand, we see Joshua and his marauders or their army waging war on Jericho with God's blessings even on a Sabbath day. The man who collected wood on Sabbath day, he was a big sinner, whereas Joshua and his army who killed people indiscriminately on a Sabbath day, they are celebrated as heroes of the Bible. There are many similar incidents of mind-boggling cruelty, debauchery, and other unethical practices in the Bible, as well as in other ancient scriptures. Apologists are quick to defend these crimes of the Bible, saying that it is all in the Old Testament, whereas in the New Testament, Jesus introduced a new code of love and compassion. These lame defenders of Christianity overlook Jesus' words in Matthew 5:17, where Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Obviously, Jesus approved or endorsed all the cruelty and violence in the Old Testament, including even slavery and other obnoxious practices. In fact, Jesus' teaching seems to be a bundle of confusing contradictions. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus teaches that we forgive our enemies and do good unto those who hate you. But in Matthew 10:33-34, Jesus says, "Do not assume that I have come to bring peace on earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law," and so on. Actually, what was the essence of Jesus' messages? Was he peaceful or was he a warmonger? Similarly, we see Muhammad later on engaging in many wars of violence, mind-boggling violence. Though he claimed he is claimed to be the prophet of peace. In like manner, Jesus narrates the story of Good Samaritan to teach us who a good neighbor is. But in 10:5, Jesus contradicts himself and instructs his followers, don't go to the Gentiles or the Samaritans. That on one hand, he recites the example of the Good Samaritan, but on the other, he says, don't be friendly with them, don't try to convert them. Coming to other religions, in Vedic Hinduism, we see Brahma, the supreme Hindu god, trying to rape his own daughter. According to Hindi myths, Vishnu, one of the supreme gods of Hinduism, incarnated 10 or more times to eradicate evil on earth. Instead, what we see is Vaman, Vishnu's fifth incarnation, engaging in deceit, and Parashuram, Vishnu's sixth incarnation, setting out on a genocidal mission against the Kshatriyas, including their pregnant women and their unborn babes. There are gangs of dacoits in India who conduct elaborate religious ceremonies at great cost before they set out on their murderous missions, proving that their religions do not stand in the way of their unethical professions. Kings and emperors used to conduct elaborate religious ceremonies before they set out on their genocidal conquests. The church itself conducted elaborate religious ceremonies before setting out on the murderous crusades. In like manner, the church conducted solemn masses before they burned scientists like Giordano Bruno at the stake during the Inquisition for teaching that the universe is infinite in size and that there may be other solar systems out there. In like manner, elaborate religious ceremonies were conducted before Joan of Arc and others were done to death for blasphemy. And remember, Jesus himself was crucified for blasphemy, which is only a religious crime and not an ethical one. Millions perished in the name of religions during the wars that followed the Reformation in Europe. The Holocaust during the Second World War, as well as the ongoing conflicts between Israelis and Arabs, and the unending conflicts between India and Pakistan, the persecution of the Rohingyas in Myanmar, the hostilities in the Balkans, and so forth, are all caused by religions. Obviously, religions and ethics are not complementary, even in the most remote sense of the word complementary. Instead, religious differences are perhaps the most universal cause of conflicts and cruelty in many parts of the world, from the Philippines in the east to Ireland in the west. This total confusion with all epics and mythical figures. In those days, hundreds of thousands of years ago, there were no professional editors or proofreaders who could do away with such confusion and contradictions as in all the scriptures. But we now have hundreds of thousands of laws and regulations and hundreds of thousands of learned lawyers and judges who can lead us forward without confusions and contradictions as in the scriptures. In the face of such systems of modern jurisprudence, resorting to ancient legal or ethical systems such as in the scriptures is like resorting to pigeon mail when we have modern communication technologies at our beck and call. We shall here examine this divergence between ethical and mythical phases of religions in the historical perspective. According to socio-economic theories, they are our activities of production and distribution of food and other necessities that determine the way we live and interact with others. Thus, ethics form the essential mental infrastructure for our survival and prosperity in societies. We are social animals and have been so for millions of years, even before we evolved into Homo sapiens. If one lives alone on an island, it does not need any ethics or morals. However, for living together in societies, we need codes of behavior towards others, and those codes are embedded into our genes. These codes help us survive and thrive. Even thieves and scoundrels have to have their own codes of behavior towards others if they are to function as a cohesive group. Humans lived for hundreds of thousands of years in transparent egalitarian bands of individuals with our inbuilt codes of cooperation. This was just like the animals, even the elephants and dogs and wolves, all these social animals. They have their genes built into their, these codes built into their genes, like we have. This was based on the maxim of one for all and all for one. Then some 10,000 to 15,000 years ago, we turned to agriculture. Subsequently, we adopted memes or ideas such as private property, inheritance, slave labor, marriage, virginity, and so forth. Accordingly, we formulated or acquired man-made gods to prop up these memes of the agricultural way of life. Consequently, we had two sets of codes for a prosperous society. The first was the natural and primary egalitarian codes written into our genes in the course of evolution and based on empathy, freedom, equality, and fraternity. The second set of codes was the artificial or acquired codes based on private property and its consequences such as marriage, the subjugation of women, family, slavery, and so forth. Then some 5,000 years ago, man invented writing. Accordingly, man recorded these behavioral codes onto stone steles and tablets, thereby establishing the rule of the written law. Emperor Ur-Nammu of ancient Sumer was perhaps the first to establish this rule of the written law. Later on, Emperor Hammurabi of Babylon, Emperor Ashoka of India, and other benevolent rulers had such codes inscribed on stones and pillars. None of these ancient codes even mention God or religions, proving that religions are not necessary for an ethical way of life. In those days, our ways of life remained the same for hundreds or even for thousands of years. Consequently, there was little or no need to modify these codes or to introduce new ones. It may also be noted here that these ethical codes were introduced long before any of the present-day religions were founded. It proves that today's religions do not have anything to do with ethics. What is more, even atheists have to stick to ethics if they are to get on with their lives in societies. Thus, there are millions of atheists and agnostics like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett in business. These atheist businessmen have to be honest and ethical in their dealings if they are to succeed in their business. Because trust and goodwill are the biggest assets in any business. Religion or the lack thereof do not contribute in any way to success in business or in life. With the Industrial Revolution and the industrial way of life, these codes of the agricultural economies, which were promoted by present religions, had to change rapidly and drastically from day to day. Accordingly, we felt the need to modify old laws and to formulate new ones. What is more, in the agricultural age, when monarchs and despots ruled over mankind, the rules were formulated by these rulers to benefit themselves. But with the industrial way of life came democracy and the courts required to protect the common man from the depredations of the rich and the powerful. Also, new inventions meant new demands on these courts and laws. Accordingly, our legislative bodies make new laws, rules, and regulations in tune with the new discoveries and inventions and their consequences on our lifestyles. In the face of such a barrage of new codes and laws in modern age, the paltry few laws and codes formulated by religions for the simple life in the agricultural age are redundant at best. Instead, we need new codes and laws to regulate our changing lifestyles of the industrial and digital ages. In the past, kings and emperors were legislators, judges, and executioners all rolled into one. But in tune with the changing times, democracy separated these functions of governance. Consequently, criminal and civil courts and procedures were established to resolve crimes and other criminal and civil issues. This resulted in the millions of pages of laws courts, precedents, and other ingredients of modern jurisprudence. In the face of such a massive resource of laws and courts which we have in modern times, the tribalistic courts promoted by 2000-year-old religions are redundant and irrelevant. As we have said, in the first primitive stage or Stone Age, we were governed by courts embedded into our genes in the course of evolution. Later on in the agricultural age, private property, marriage, and other institutions became the cornerstone of our social and ethical lives. Accordingly, we needed a few unchanging codes to regulate our social life based on private property and its consequences such as marriage, family, slavery, adultery, and so forth. In addition, there were codes and laws which were not universal. Thus, Christianity looks on polygamy as a crime, whereas Islam has no such qualms against polygamy. In some parts of India and Nepal, polyandry, the practice of one woman having many husbands, was perfectly legal and ethical. This proves that only codes written into our genes are perennial, whereas the laws and regulations adopted in later stage of human civilization are flexible and change with time and place and religions. Then there are the vindictive laws of the tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye, which also seem to be universal and yet frowned upon by most societies. After the agricultural age, we turned to the third stage of socio-economic development, the industrial age. In the third stage or the industrial new age, we need far more complex rules and laws in tune with our complex lifestyles which keep changing by the day. Obviously, the egalitarian laws of the Stone Age cannot function in the agricultural age based on private property, marriage, and monarchy. And in like manner, the laws of the agricultural age are not competent enough to regulate life in the modern age. Thus, in the Stone Age, laws of the Ten Commandments, such as thou shalt not steal, or thou shalt not commit adultery, or thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods or your neighbor's wife, and such laws had no relevance whatsoever, because in the Stone Age they had no private property to be stolen, nor was there any marriage, and so no adultery or coveting of your neighbor's wives. In like manner, modern laws such as traffic laws, cyber laws, building laws, and so forth had no relevance in the sedentary lifestyles of our ancestors in the agricultural age. Now that we have examined the history of ethics and morals, we will consider the history of religions. Man lived like any other social animal for hundreds of thousands of years. Then about 50,000 years ago, we began to develop or evolve the arts. Thus we began to draw and paint on cave walls, to string together beads and to wear them around our necks, and to pierce our noses and ears, and to wear all kinds of ornaments. We also began to sing and dance and to spin all kinds of stories. Our ancestors may not have been as good as we are in most of these activities, but they matched us in spinning outrageous stories which evolved into modern myths. Another offshoot of this mimetic revolution was science. Probably animals also connect or relate events as causes and even consequences. Unless they did this, it would not be possible for predatory animals to ambush their victims or for their victims to escape such covert attacks. But humans went a step further and began to find cause-consequences relationship in all events, even when there were no such causal relationships. Thus, man began to search for the causes of diseases, natural disasters, and other misfortunes in life. With the limited knowledge and the facilities available to him, Stone Age man was not in a position to find the causes of such events of consequence. Not finding the causes of such events of consequences caused him considerable mental stress and anguish. So, with his propensity or disposition to spin stories, Stone Age man invented imaginary causes for the incidents of fortune and misfortune in his life. In the course of spinning such stories and in looking for the causes of events, he invented imaginary agents such as spirits and mythical figures, which, according to his stories, were controlling all events on earth. This led to animism, the concept of attributing souls to natural phenomena such as wind, rain, lightning, and thunder. Later on, dreams of the dead led to beliefs in life after death. Thus, primitive religions consisted of beliefs in two kinds of superstition or supernatural beings. One, beliefs in the spirit or souls controlling nature, natural phenomena such as storms and lightning and thunder, etc. And the second was belief in the spirits of the dead. Accordingly, each event was considered as unique and attributed to the spirits of nature or to the souls of the dead. The priestly class, such as shamans and witch doctors, stepped in, claiming to know the will of these gods and spirits of the and of the souls of the dead. These men and women of the priestly class were and are the most significant ingredients of what we call religions. In the final analysis, religion is an institution for control and exploitation of the people by the priests and for the priests. Perhaps the most significant question that our ancestors asked themselves was, what is the meaning of life? With the limitations he had, man was not able to find an answer to this question. Again, his myths gave him answers to this mother of all philosophical questions on the meaning of life. As narrated, the priests and shamans played an important role in finding answers to the questions that our ancestors raised. They claimed that they were God's representatives and could provide answers to such questions. Who the priests claimed they knew the will of the gods. Accordingly, when some natural or social disasters struck, our ancestors attributed them to the will or the anger of the supernatural beings. These men and women of the priestly class attributed the anger and displeasure of the gods to blasphemy, improper ways of worship, or to their unethical ways of life, as in the case of Sodom and Gomorrah. Retribution in the form of donations, prayers, and offerings was needed to soothe and pacify the gods. It was in this way that ethics and superstitions came to be associated with priests and religions. As we have narrated, man underwent a cultural revolution some 50,000 years ago when he began to engage in the arts such as cave drawings, making ornaments, singing and dancing, telling stories, and so forth. These cultural concepts revolved around the stories of heroes, ancestors, ghosts, and spirits. Each geographic area or culture gave rise to its own myths and stories of these heroes and supernatural beings. These stories from adjoining areas borrowed from each other to form new myths, such as the Jews borrowing the Epic of Gilgamesh from Babylonian folklore and incorporating it into the Bible as the word of God in the story of Noah and the flood. Many memes, such as the one God meme and myths like the Epic of Gilgamesh, arose in the Middle East, whereas myths centered around Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu sprang up and evolved in India and in the adjoining areas. Then, some 2000 to 2500 years ago, these stories and myths were compiled into books and codices such as the Bible or the Mahabharata. Subsequently, these books and codices became the foundations of different religions such as Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, and so forth. These myths and scriptures in written form resisted further mutation or change of content, as against the verbal transfer of myths which kept changing with every transmission. What is more, the different religions based on different books began to look upon each other as blasphemers and enemies. Religions and their denominations differ from each other and argue with each other on the veracity of their own myths. These differences in myths of religions cannot be settled rationally in any way. Consequently, they have resorted to violence to establish that their myth alone is the credible one and all other myths are blasphemous and anger the gods and lead to misfortunes in life. Later on, man found that each event has a unique cause and a unique consequences under identical circumstances, irrespective of time or place. This led to the separation of religion and science starting some 2000 years ago, but gaining true momentum only about 300 years ago when religion and science bifurcated irreconcilably. So we can say that science had its origins in the same compulsions as religion, in the human tendency to connect events as causes and consequences. We can even consider religion as proto-science or a primitive form of science. What is more, science developed its own language, mathematics, in its various forms, which itself is based on validated evidence. In contrast, religions had their own language based on faith and allegories. In the process, priests and religions resort to logical fallacies such as the appeal to authority, the appeal to ancient myths, appeal to popularity, and so forth. Let us now examine religions on the basis of what we have said. Most, if not religion, or not all religions, generally are in agreement with each other when it comes to their ethical dimensions. Thus, all religions propagate codes against dishonesty and violence, and so does atheism. Then there are the sexual offenses, which are common to all established religions of the agricultural era. However, religions differ irreconcilably with each other in their myths and superstitions, and in their prescriptions on pleasing the gods and avoiding misfortunes. Thus, the Semitic religions promote Yahweh as the one and only God, whereas religions of India have a coterie of gods, goddesses, and spirits. These myths and superstitions are regional in nature. They arose and then diverge in different areas and cultures of the world. Consequently, the different religions which arose in the same or adjoining areas of the world have identical or similar characteristics. Thus, the idea of one god arose in Egypt or Persia and diffused to the adjoining areas, giving rise to monotheistic religions such as Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Different interpretations of the same myth led to different denominations of the same religions. It is in their superstitious or their mythical content that one religion differs from another. Thus, Vedic Hinduism is based on the Vedas, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and so forth. Non-Vedic Hinduism is based on the myths of Shiv, Subramanian, Ganesh, et al. Christianity is based on the biblical myths which arose in Palestine. Christianity then splintered into about 50,000 sects based on the different interpretations of the same biblical myth. Islam and its denominations are based on the myths propagated by Muhammad in Arabia, myths which Muhammad and his followers plagiarized from Judaism and Christianity. The mythical side of most modern religions is based on the stories compiled about 2000 to 2500 years ago in books such as the Bible or the Ramayana. What is more, each myth is limited to a particular geographical area in which these myths are their origin. Some of these myths became extinct with time. As a result, some gods and religions based on these myths also became defect, such as the gods and religions of ancient Greece, Rome, and Egypt. Our myths may promote ethical codes, but most, if not all, myths describe gods or divine entities promoting unethical ways. Thus, the Bible promotes genocide and slavery, and so do most religions of the agricultural age. The mythical side of religions propagated the practices of societies 2000 or more years ago. However, they have no relevance in modern societies. Instead, these myths are the cause of all religious violence we see in this world today. In contrast, humans agree with each other on the ethical side of religion, such as the necessity to be empathic, honest, and peaceful in our dealings with others. They have been practiced by our primate ancestors even before we evolved into humans. So the claim that ethics have their origin in 2000-year-old religions is frivolous. The problem with the religions is that they mix up the mythical and ethical side of societies. Subsequently, they boast that only their own religion has an ethical side, while all other religions do not have any ethics. Some devotees use special words such as dharma and karma to distinguish their code of ethics from others. If you agree to disagree with the mythical side of religions and agree to the ethical side of religions, then there is no cause for conflict between religions. Unfortunately, we are conditioned from childhood that our religion alone is the true one and that all other religions are diabolic. If we can set aside this prejudice against other religions, there need not be any conflict between religions. I am from India and I have limitations as regards speaking in English, which is an acquired language for me. Any defect in that regard may please be overlooked. Thank you for listening to me and please subscribe.